The transmission came in at 3:47 hours, Universal Standard Time. I remember the exact moment because I was on my third cup of synthetic coffee, watching the same dull green readout scroll across my terminal for the 100th time that shift. The Deep Space Monitoring Station on Titan's largest moon had been built for emergencies, but in the 12 years I'd served there, the most exciting thing we'd ever picked up was a rogue comet with an unusual mineral composition. That changed at 3:47. The signal wasn't complex. It wasn't encrypted, wasn't disguised, wasn't anything except raw, unfiltered terror broadcast across 14 different frequencies simultaneously. Whoever sent it wanted to be heard, needed to be heard. The desperation in that transmission cut through the static like a blade through flesh. Unknown vessel, under attack, repeat under attack, requesting immediate military assistance. Please, anyone, they're killing us, they're killing everyone. The voice cracked on the last word. I'd heard fear before, heard it in training simulations, heard it in the rare distress calls from civilian ships that had wandered too close to unstable wormholes. But this was different. This was the sound of someone who knew they were going to die, and their only hope was a prayer shouted into the void. The coordinates that followed were what made my blood run cold. Not because they were unusual, they were distressingly familiar. The signal came from the system, a small star about 500 light-years from Earth. The system had been one of humanity's first major extrasolar colonization efforts, a terraformed world we'd named New Eden that had grown into a thriving hub of commerce and culture. Or it had been until 3 months ago. 3 months ago, the Galactic Federation had issued an ultimatum. The Xenos, as we'd come to call them, had decided that humanity's expansion was destabilizing the quadrant, and demanded we withdraw from all systems beyond the Sol boundary. When we refused, they'd imposed a blockade. When we still refused, they'd started making examples. New Eden was supposed to be the first, a demonstration of power that would make humanity back down, accept its place as a minor species in a galaxy full of civilizations that had been spacefaring for millennia. The distress call meant they'd moved ahead with their plans. I hit the emergency alert button with shaking hands. The station's klaxons began to wail, red lights flashing in rhythm with the siren that would summon every officer on duty to the command center. But my eyes never left the display screen, watching the signal degrade as the transmitting vessel, a civilian transport called the Starlight Dreamer, began to fall apart. The transmission continued for another 43 seconds. I counted each one. Please, we have children on board. We have. Oh God, they've breached the hull. Please, anyone. Earth Command, if you're listening. They underestimated us. They don't understand what they've done. They don't understand what they've woken. The last word stretched out into a scream, then dissolved into static. I sat there in the silence, heart pounding so hard I could hear my own blood rushing in my ears. The duty officer, Commander Reyes, burst through the door with half his uniform on, hair disheveled, eyes wild. Report, Ensign, what do we have? I found my voice somewhere deep in my chest. Distress signal, sir. System, the Starlight Dreamer, under attack by, I paused, looking at the frequency analysis. Unknown Xeno vessels. They're not using Federation standard weapons. This is something new. Reyes moved to the console, his face going pale as he read the data. How long? Signals already degraded. They're gone, sir, all of them. He nodded slowly, processing the information. Then he did something I didn't expect. He smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the cold, predatory expression of a man who'd just been handed the weapon he'd been waiting for. Ensign, I need you to transmit the following message to Earth Command Priority Alpha 1. Tell them the distress call has been verified. Tell them the Xenos have made their move. And tell them, he paused, his eyes meeting mine. Tell them the game is finally on. The next 72 hours were chaos. I watched from my post as the entire Titan station transformed from a sleepy outpost into a command hub. Ships arrived constantly, not the civilian freighters we usually saw, but military vessels. The kind we didn't talk about in public, the kind that existed only in conspiracy theories and whispers. They came in silent, their hulls black and angular, designed for stealth and violence rather than comfort. I'd never seen anything like them. None of us had. On the third day, a shuttle arrived carrying a delegation from Earth Command. I recognized the insignia, the golden phoenix rising from the ashes of a shattered world, the symbol of the Terran Defense Force. But these weren't standard officers. They wore no ranks, no medals, no visible marks of distinction. Their uniforms were simple gray, their faces expressionless. They moved through the station like ghosts, speaking in low voices, glancing at data displays with eyes that seemed to see more than they should. I tried to avoid them. There was something about those gray uniforms that made my skin crawl, something that reminded me of the stories my grandfather used to tell about the old wars, before humanity had reached the stars. On the fourth day, I learned what the gray uniforms meant. Commander Reyes called me into his office early in the morning. The room was dim, the only light coming from a holographic display showing the system. New Eden's blue-green surface filled most of the projection, beautiful and fragile-looking. The Federation vessels were visible as red dots, scattered across the system like angry hornets. "Ensign Corps," Reyes said, gesturing for me to sit. "You've been with this station for 12 years. In that time, you've proven yourself reliable, discreet, and loyal. That's why I'm going to tell you something that very few people know." He paused, studying my face. I tried to keep my expression neutral, but my heart was racing. "Those men in gray," he continued. "They're not standard military. They're not even standard anything. They're the last remnants of a program that officially doesn't exist, a program designed for exactly this situation. When the Federation made their move, the program was reactivated." "What program, sir?" Reyes leaned back in his chair, his eyes distant. "How much do you know about humanity's history before the Exodus?" I frowned. "You mean before we left Earth? The usual stuff, I guess. Environmental collapse, the great wars, the breakthroughs that gave us interstellar travel. And before that, the old histories, the ones that don't make it into the standard curriculum." "Sir, I'm not sure what you're getting at." He smiled that cold smile again. "I'm getting at the fact that humanity didn't just evolve on Earth, Ensign. We were engineered, modified, shaped by forces we don't fully understand. And when the Federation decided to make an example of us, they forgot one crucial detail." "What's that, sir?" Reyes leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. "They forgot that humanity doesn't have a fight-or-flight response. We have a fight response. And when we're pushed to the brink, when we have nowhere left to run, we become something else. Something the galaxy hasn't seen in millennia." He gestured to the holographic display. "The men in gray are the inheritors of that legacy. They're not soldiers, they're weapons. Weapons designed for a war we've been preparing for since before we left Earth. And now, the enemy has declared that war." I stared at the display, at the innocent-looking blue world hanging in space. "New Eden, sir. The people there." Reyes shook his head. "New Eden is already lost. The signal was clear. The Federation didn't just attack. They destroyed. Every vessel in the system, every colony, every outpost. They wanted to send a message to show us that resistance was futile." He paused, his expression hardening. "But they made a mistake. They didn't just attack a colony world. They attacked a human world, and that means we get to respond." "Response, sir? With what? The Federation outnumbers us 100 to 1. Reyes stood, walking to the window that looked out over the station's main operations deck. Through the reinforced glass, I could see the gray uniformed men gathering around a central console, their heads bent together in conference. "They do outnumber us, Ensign. They have better ships, better weapons, better technology. They're older than us, more experienced, more powerful in every measurable way. He turned back to face me, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes that I'd never seen before. Not fear, not anger, something older, something primal, something that had been sleeping for a very long time and was finally beginning to stir. But what they don't have, he said quietly, is the one thing that makes humanity unstoppable. They don't have the desperation protocol. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The what? You'll find out soon enough. The order came through an hour ago. The protocol has been activated. Within the week, we'll be responding to that distress call. Sir, is 500 light-years away. Even with the fastest ships, it would take months to. The fastest ships, Ensign, aren't the ones the protocol uses. The protocol uses something else. Something we've been building in secret for decades. Something the Federation doesn't even know exists. He smiled again, and this time there was no warmth in it. They made a mistake when they attacked New Eden. They thought they were dealing with a prey species. They don't understand that they're dealing with something that only becomes more dangerous when it's wounded. The men in gray, I said slowly, they're part of the protocol. They are the protocol. Every one of them is a volunteer. Every one of them has gone through modifications we don't discuss in polite company. And every one of them is more than willing to do what needs to be done. He turned back to the window. You're about to see something remarkable, Ensign. You're about to see what happens when humanity decides that the cost of peace is too high and the price of war is meaningless. You're about to see the one thing the Federation never counted on. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was barely audible. You're about to see what happens when we stop holding back. The next week passed in a blur of activity. The gray-uniformed men, I learned they called themselves the Initiative, took control of the station, converting it into something that felt more like a warship than a monitoring post. Sections of the facility that had been locked for years were suddenly opened, revealing equipment I'd never seen before. Weapons that hummed with an energy I didn't recognize. Computers that seemed to think for themselves. Data storage that held secrets older than the station itself. I kept my head down, doing my job, trying to stay out of the Initiative's way. But I couldn't help watching them, couldn't help noticing the small details that made them so unsettling. They moved with an economy of motion that was almost unnatural, conserving energy, never wasting a single gesture. Their eyes were constantly scanning, cataloging, evaluating. They spoke in short, clipped sentences that conveyed maximum information with minimum words, and they didn't seem to need sleep. I saw them working around the clock, never showing signs of fatigue, never losing focus. The worst part, though, was when they smiled. It happened rarely, and never at anything I would consider funny. It was always in response to something technical, a particular efficiency in a system, a flaw in an enemy's strategy, a successful test of a new weapon. The smiles were cold, clinical, the expressions of a predator that had just discovered a weakness in its prey. On the 5th day after the distress call, Commander Reyes called a station-wide meeting. Everyone who could be spared from their duties gathered in the main operations hub, a vast circular room with screens covering every surface. I stood near the back, trying to blend in, watching as Reyes stepped onto a raised platform at the center of the room. "We received new intelligence," he began, his voice echoing through the space. "The Federation has made an announcement. They're claiming that the destruction of New Eden was a necessary measure to establish galactic order. They're giving humanity 72 hours to withdraw from all systems beyond the Sol boundary or face similar consequences." A murmur ran through the crowd. I could feel the tension in the air, the barely suppressed anger. The people on this station were mostly career officers, professionals who'd spent their lives maintaining the peace, watching over humanity's expansion. They hadn't signed up for war. But there was something else in the room, too, something that surprised me. Not fear. Determination. The Council, Reyes continued, has decided that there will be no withdrawal. Humanity's position is clear. We will not be intimidated, we will not be pushed back, and we will not abandon the worlds we've built. We will respond to this attack with full force, using every weapon at our disposal. He paused, letting the words sink in. That response begins tomorrow. At 600 hours, the initiative will depart to engage the Federation forces in the system. They're not going there to negotiate. They're not going there to show strength. They're going there to send a message. What kind of message? Someone called out from the crowd. Reyes's expression didn't change. The kind that ensures this never happens again. The kind that makes the galaxy understand that humanity is not prey, that we will never be prey. I heard someone next to me whisper, "What if they can't do it? What if the Federation's too strong?" Another voice, colder, replied, "Have you been paying attention? The initiative isn't about winning battles, it's about something else, something worse." Like what? I turned to see who was speaking, and found myself looking at an older technician, his face lined with years of service. His eyes were fixed on the platform, on the gray uniformed figures standing silently behind Reyes. "Like making the enemy regret they ever messed with us," he said quietly. "Like showing them that there are things worse than losing, things they've never imagined." I felt a chill run down my spine. The man's words echoed in my head, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to witness something terrible, something that would change everything. But there was no stopping it now. The wheels were in motion, and humanity was hurtling towards something that none of us fully understood. The initiative departed at exactly 600 hours the next morning. I watched from the observation deck as the ships launched, sleek and silent, their black hulls absorbing the light of Titan's distant sun. There were 43 of them in total, a fleet that seemed far too small for the task ahead. Each ship was the size of a small cruiser, but they moved like fighters, agile and deadly. The command ship, the unyielding Resolve, was the last to depart. I watched it rise from the station's landing bay, its engines burning with a blue-white light that was almost painful to look at. The ship's hull was marked with symbols I didn't recognize, ancient glyphs that seemed to shift and change as the light played over them. "They're going to die," a voice said next to me. I turned to see one of the initiative members, a woman with silver eyes and hair cropped close to her skull. She was watching the ships with an expression I couldn't read. "What do you mean?" "Those ships," she said, gesturing at the fading dots on the horizon. "They're not designed for conventional combat. They're designed for something else, something that doesn't involve coming home." "But you're going with them." She nodded. "I'm one of the pilots. My ship's the Thanatos. It's named after an old Earth god, the god of death." I stared at her, not sure what to say. She seemed almost cheerful about it, as if she was discussing nothing more serious than a routine training exercise. "We all volunteered," she continued. "Every single one of us. We knew what we were signing up for and we did it anyway, because we understand something that the Federation doesn't." "What's that?" She turned to face me, and for the first time I saw something human in her eyes, something that was almost pain. "War isn't about winning," she said. "It's about making the other side hurt enough that they don't want to fight anymore. And when it comes to making people hurt, humanity has a special talent, one that we've been suppressing for centuries." She reached out and touched my shoulder, a surprisingly gentle gesture from someone so cold. "When we get to the Kepler system, we're going to show them what that talent looks like. And you're going to see it too. You're going to see what happens when humanity stops playing nice." She turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing on the metal floor. I watched her go, a chill running down my spine. The unyielding Resolve had already disappeared into the void, heading toward the fold point that would take it to the Kepler system. I knew, in that moment, that everything was about to change. It took exactly 3 days for the fleet to reach its destination. I know this because I spent those 3 days glued to the communications console, watching the data streams that trickled in from the ships. The initiative had set up a relay network that allowed near real-time communication, and every station in the outer systems was receiving the feeds. The first transmission came at 3:47 hours on the third day, exactly 1 week after the original distress call. It was from the unyielding Resolve, and it was brief. Approaching, enemy fleet detected, 47 vessels, all combat class. They've established a blockade around the planet. No survivors detected. A pause then. Beginning attack pattern Sigma 7. Desperation protocol engaged. All hands prepare for combat. The next 30 minutes were the most terrifying of my life. We watched from the station as the small human fleet struck the Federation ships like a hammer against glass. The initiative's vessels moved with a coordination that seemed almost supernatural, dancing through the enemy's defensive fire as if they could predict every shot before it was fired. Their weapons we'd never seen, weapons that seemed to violate every law of physics we understood, cut through Federation shields like they weren't even there. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what happened when the human ships got close enough. The Thanatos was the first to make contact, ramming a Federation cruiser at full speed. The impact should have destroyed both ships. I could see the explosion in the sensor data, a brilliant flare of light that faded into debris. But the Thanatos didn't explode. It did something else, something that made me want to look away. The ship seemed to dissolve, its hull breaking apart into millions of nanoscopic fragments that swarmed the Federation vessel like a cloud of locusts. The fragments burrowed through the enemy's armor, seeking out weak points, exploiting every flaw. In seconds, the cruiser was gone, not destroyed but consumed. Consumed by something that had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. The other initiative ships followed suit, each one using a different method of attack, each one more horrifying than the last. I watched one vessel launch a projectile that seemed to bend space itself, opening a miniature black hole that swallowed an entire Federation squadron. I saw another release a cloud of bioweapons that transformed the crew of a dreadnought into screaming, mindless husks in seconds. But the command ship, the unyielding Resolve, was the worst of all. It hung in space like a specter, doing nothing visible, projecting nothing, firing nothing. But every Federation ship that came within its range simply stopped. Their crews froze in place, their eyes going blank, their minds seemingly wiped clean by some invisible force. The ships drifted, crewed by the living dead, unable to fight back, unable to defend themselves. The Federation fleet didn't stand a chance. The battle lasted exactly 18 minutes. When it was over, there was nothing left of the enemy. No ships, no crews, no survivors. Just silence and debris and the fatting echoes of screams that had traveled across the void. The unyielding Resolve sent another transmission, this one even briefer than the first. Enemy fleet neutralized, survivors none, moving to planetary orbit, commencing cleanup operation. I realized then that cleanup operation meant something terrible, something that would haunt me for the rest of my life. The fleet descended on New Eden not to rescue survivors. There were no survivors, the Federation had seen to that, but to do something else. They searched the planet's surface, looking for any sign of the enemy. What they found was worse than I'd imagined. The Federation hadn't just attacked the colony. They destroyed it completely, leaving nothing behind but ruins and ash. There was no one to save, no one to help. Just a dead world, silent and cold. But that wasn't what made me want to weep. What made me want to weep was the transmission that followed, from one of the initiative officers on the ground. "We've found something," she said, her voice flat, emotionless. "The Federation left behind a message, a warning. They wanted us to know that this was just the beginning." She paused, and I could hear something in her voice, something that might have been anger or might have been sorrow. They left behind the bodies, every single one of them, arranged in patterns around the colony's central plaza. Children, adults, even infants. They wanted us to see what they'd done. They wanted to break our spirits to make us beg for mercy. Another pause, longer this time. They don't know us. They don't know what we're capable of. They think this will make us back down, make us surrender, but they're wrong. They've just made the biggest mistake in galactic history. I heard a click as the transmission ended. The station was silent, everyone frozen in place, staring at the displays that showed the carnage. Commander Reyes broke the silence, his voice strained. "Initiative," he said. "What is your next move?" The response came after a moment, from the captain of the unyielding resolve. "We're going to send a message of our own," he said. "We're going to make the Federation understand that there's a price for hurting humanity, a price so high that they'll never even think about doing it again." "How are you going to do that?" The captain laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. "We're going to show them what fear really is. We're going to show them what happens when you wake up a species that's been sleeping for 1,000 years. There's something you need to know," I said into the microphone, not realizing I'd even spoken until I heard my own voice echoing through the room. "The Federation ships, they're not all dead. They can't be. There must be survivors. The Federation is old, they're cunning. They would have had escape pods, hidden reserves, something." The silence on the other end of the transmission was deafening. For a moment, I thought I'd made a terrible mistake, that I'd overstepped my bounds in the worst possible way. But then the captain spoke again, and there was something different in his voice, something that might have been respect. "Ensign Corps," he said, reading my name from the display. "You're right, there are survivors, a dozen or so hiding in the asteroid field on the edge of the system. They think we don't know they're there. They think they're safe." "Are they?" I asked, almost hoping the answer would be yes. "No," the captain said, "but we're not going to kill them. That would be too easy. We're going to let them go. We're going to let them return to their masters and tell them what happened here. We're going to let them spread the word." "What word?" The captain paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was soft, almost gentle. "The word that humanity is not to be trifled with, that we are not prey, that when you hurt us, you invite something worse than death. We're going to let them tell their leaders that the desperation protocol is real, that it's been awakened, and that there is no force in the galaxy that can stop us now." The transmission ended. The station was silent, everyone looking at me, their faces a mixture of shock and something that might have been admiration. Commander Reyes stepped forward, his eyes meeting mine. "Ensign Corps," he said quietly, "you just gave the Federation its only warning. You gave them something they didn't know they needed, a chance." "A chance for what, sir?" "A chance to surrender," he said, "before it's too late." The aftermath of the battle was unlike anything I had ever experienced. The station's mood shifted dramatically in the days that followed. There was no celebration, no sense of victory. Instead, there was a heavy silence, a collective holding of breath as we waited to see what would happen next. The initiative fleet had returned to Titan, their ships dark and silent, their crews refusing to speak to anyone outside their ranks. I watched them disembark from the observation deck, each figure in gray moving with the same economy of motion, the same cold efficiency. They looked the same as they had before, nothing had changed, and yet everything had changed. They had done something terrible in the Kepler system, something that I couldn't quite wrap my mind around. And they had done it because humanity had asked them to. Commander Reyes called me to his office a week after the battle. He looked older than I remembered, his face lined with worry, his eyes tired. "Sit down, Ensign," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "We need to talk." I sat, my heart pounding. I had a feeling I knew what was coming. "The Federation has sent a formal communication," he said, his voice flat. "They're requesting a parley. They want to negotiate terms for our withdrawal from the outer systems. I stared at him, not sure I'd heard correctly. Withdrawal, but we won. We completely destroyed their fleet. Reyes shook his head. We destroyed one fleet. They have dozens more, hundreds more. The Federation isn't just one government, it's a coalition of dozens of species, each with its own military, its own resources, its own motivations. We proved that we can hurt them, but we also proved that we're a threat, and threats have a way of uniting enemies. Then why are they requesting a parley? Because we scared them, Reyes said simply. Not just the fleet we destroyed, they were prepared for that. No, what scared them was what we did, the way we did it. The desperation protocol is something they've never encountered before, something they didn't even know existed. They're afraid of what we might do next. He paused, leaning forward. And that's why we need to make a deal. We need to show them that we're not monsters, that we're willing to negotiate, that there's a way to coexist. But after what they did to New Eden— I know, Reyes interrupted, his voice hard. I know what they did, and part of me wants to burn every Federation world to the ground to make them pay for every life they took. But that's not who we are. We're not the butchers. We're not the monsters. We're humanity, and we choose to be better. He stood, walking to the window that overlooked the station's operations deck. The initiative will be disarmed. The desperation protocol will be sealed. We will negotiate from a position of strength, but we will negotiate. That's what makes us different from the enemy. And if the Federation refuses to negotiate? I asked, dreading the answer. Reyes turned to face me, and for the first time I saw the fear in his eyes. Then we'll have no choice. The protocol will be unsealed, and will show the Federation the full extent of what humanity can do. And none of us, Ensign, none of us will survive that. I didn't understand what he meant at the time. I do now. The desperation protocol isn't just a weapon, it's a transformation. When humanity is pushed to the brink, when we have nothing left to lose, we become something else. Something that doesn't care about survival, doesn't care about consequences, doesn't care about anything except making the enemy pay. The initiative members are the first step in that transformation. They've been modified, enhanced, turned into weapons. But they're not the final step. The final step is something worse, something that exists only in the darkest corners of human imagination. Something that only emerges when hope is dead and all that's left is rage. I've seen the classified files. I know what's waiting in the shadows, ready to be unleashed if the Federation refuses to negotiate. And I pray every night that it never comes to that. 3 weeks after the battle, the Federation agreed to a temporary ceasefire. The negotiations are ongoing, conducted in a neutral system at the edge of human space. The initiative has been stood down, its members returned to their hidden facilities, their gray uniforms packed away with their weapons. But they're still there, waiting, watching, ready to be awakened if the negotiations fail. And somewhere, deep in the void, the unyielding Resolve and its crew are still out there, doing what they do best, making sure the galaxy never forgets what happens when you wake the sleeping giant. I think about the distress call sometimes, late at night, when the station is quiet and the only sound is the hum of the life support systems. I think about the Starlight Dreamer, about the children on board, about the fear in that captain's voice as she sent her message into the void. I think about what she said at the end, the words that have haunted me since I heard them. They don't understand what they've woken. She was right, the Federation didn't understand. But they do now. And that's why, despite everything that's happened, despite the lives lost, the destruction, the horror, I still have hope. Because the Federation finally understands that humanity isn't a prey species. We're the survivors, the ones who refuse to give up, the ones who will do whatever it takes to protect what's ours. We are humanity. And we will never be broken.